Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian, and today we're going to talk about everything that comes with Victoria 3's upcoming immersion pack, Iberian Twilight. As the name already indicates, this DLC that releases on the 11th of December, well, it is focused on Iberia, but also her prior colonies. Now, I do want to say here that if you haven't picked up this DLC yet and are planning on doing it, feel free to buy it in the Paradox store. Link is of course in a pinned comment. If you use the code OneProudBavarian, all small, when you check out, you will give me a small share of the revenue, helping me out directly. Now in this video, I will go over literally everything. All that we're missing right now is the exact changelog and the achievements, but let's be real here, that doesn't really matter. I was surprised as I walked through this list and checked out exactly what all the dev diaries had to say, just how much actually is in the free patch here and in the DLC proper. But today we're going to start with talking about a lot of stuff that has changed when it comes to politics and laws. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in there, and frankly none of it has to do with Iberia, which is really exciting to me, because, well, yeah, they are really working on many areas in this game, even if it is not entirely in the scope of the DLC. First here, we have laws and interest group negotiations. When you pass a law, it's essentially 3 sieges in EU4 in a trench coat, right? Just 3 waves that you need to pass, and then it is passed proper. They have now slightly changed this, nothing too major, but frankly, you can now have a much bigger impact on this. When there is an interest group that is neutral on the law, that could be positive, or an interest group that is hostile, that could be neutral, you can offer them concessions. These are negotiations. Once you offer them something, they will take it and elevate to the next better stage, so either neutral to support or hostile to neutral. The important thing here is to note that this is very different from EU5's parliamentary concessions, for example, where just random concessions are chosen. Rather, here, the group will look at their amenity level. Amenity describes how much they like this law and how much they are willing to negotiate, either being neutral or even outright supporting it. That means that not all concessions are always viable, and it means that sometimes they aren't viable at all. Now, this might surprise you, but no, I don't think that the capitalists will willingly vote for themselves being executed anytime soon. Now, this does mean that we are looking at button presses, sometimes just short-term bonuses, but sometimes they also actually offer proper amendments and changes to the law that you are currently passing and for which you need their consent. Associated with this feature is of course not only the risk that it might come out that you're doing, a couple of backroom dealings, but also the fact that it can very well happen that one of these negotiation demands that you need to fulfill is a bit more wider ranging than just something related to giving them a little bit of money. Instead, they might act like small mini quests where you make them an actual promise that you now need to fulfill, or they will become incredibly unhappy. This is a really nice and flexible approach to gaining more approval, or at the very least, stopping an interest group from leading you down the road of a law failing because they are opposing it. I think this is really nice. I really want to see what this does to modernization, whether the landowners are very amenable or not, but either way, I think this is a nice mechanic. Pretty much directly connected to this actually, we have electoral confidence. This is all about voter trust. Essentially, when you make your way from being a backwater country into something that is somewhat modern, you pass, well, electoral laws, not everybody will immediately trust whether these elections actually work, whether they're safe, and so on. Electoral confidence describes this exactly. Low confidence gives legitimacy issues, but makes it easier for the wealthy and influential to govern behind the scenes, which means essentially rigging elections. So clearly, having low confidence isn't entirely negative. It gives you an easier way of having a certain ruling class. All nations that do not have the tradition for free elections are also in a situation where they can outrightly manipulate elections. So that means your elections will now be more eventful, and your elections, of course, will begin to actually either have a civic tradition or to exactly lack that thing. Now, by and large, events in the election cycle will directly impact this, making it so that either the faith in the system is shaken or solidified. If there is, for example, escalating political violence and you do nothing, well, yeah, you know where that is going. If you, for the very first time, turn to democracy, starting confidence depends on literacy, urbanization, and institutions that inform the population to trust elections, like, for example, elected bureaucrats. Now, directly connected to this is another feature, that is law amendments. Laws now can be getting amendments. Previously, we already had national versions of laws. We can, for example, think of isolationism in the Great Qing, but now we have amendments for standard laws. As an example, wealth voting differed between France and Britain historically speaking. This is now actually featured via a national amendment to a normal law. Now you might ask, okay, how do I get amendments? Essentially, most of the time you either have them because they were historically something that just existed, or they can be added during the law passing process. That means that when you pass a law, it might end up having a slightly different impact just because you wanted to use the benefits of attaching an amendment to it. This can be great for passing the law, but the amendment afterwards might be quite annoying for you. To appeal these type of amendments, you then need a government that collectively dislikes that amendment significantly. This entire feature is awesome. It means that in any given playthrough, there's no guarantee that your wealth voting or your republic are actually the same, because you might end up with an amendment that makes it so that your election, quote-unquote, is really just a sham, as your landowners are able to push for their own rights much more efficiently and legally thanks to the amendment than in any other country. The flavor that we get from this, honestly, is really neat. This brings us directly to the next topic, which is electoral clientelism. This is a special amendment that is present in the Spanish-speaking world at game start and can be incredibly stabilizing and powerful, but also treacherous because it cements people in power that you might not want there. This amendment lets the player decide the results of an election, as was commonly done in the Spanish-speaking world at the time. It will cost you legitimacy, but it can stabilize your regime that otherwise might get rocked by so many revolutions and unrest that, yeah, you don't really have a chance of running your country altogether. This amendment does not go away when you're switching to a different electoral law. To purge it entirely, you must not use it 5 times in a row in elections. Because, well then, yeah, a new tradition emerges, a tradition in which these old privileges of intervening in the legal process are just no longer really taken seriously and with that fade out of existence. This is the most direct way that we have of us engaging in electoral politics. I will say that elections really truly are not interesting even now. I will say this is cool, I'm looking forward to more changes to elections. I just can't complain. I think the amendments altogether are insanely neat. The way that they now function gives you a lot more flavor that comes from a deeply systemic and mechanical point, rather than, you know, just from events. Now you might say, wow, those are a lot of free changes, but we are not even close to done. Sorry, it's a lot. The Victoria 3 team really is blowing it out of the water, I think, with constantly reworking for the better, much for the better, the free content of the game as well. A smaller part here are, for example, treaty addendums. These are free text spaces where you can leave any message, and I think that virtually always will apply to multiplayer. At least when I play multiplayer with my friends, we always make kind of secondary agreements to what a treaty means, when a defensive pact, for example, is binding and when it isn't. I really like this, and I will be using it, but I will also tell you, I would actually like it if they went deeper on treaties and allowed highly specific treaties, similar to how certain conditions in script in Victoria 3 have to be met so that an event triggers. What I mean here is stuff that a defensive pact could potentially be directionally only against one particular country, or only active in one particular region of the world. I think that would be pretty neat, and I would like to see these treaty addendums kind of facilitating this in multiplayer, but not in single player. Now back to more tangible stuff. The coups have been reworked entirely. Coups were added with Voice of the People. That journal entry is completely gone, and coups are now free content. They start if an IG, so an interest group, has -10 approval or more, and a general of theirs exists in the country. Coup strength then will fight against coup resistance. This means that if you are very resistant, if you have strong institutions and a strong army, you will do much better, rather than it just ticking up or ticking down based on random reasons. This new content also has multiple outcomes. The calculation here is a lot more interesting of what was done in the previous design. If the character that was chosen for that angry interest group as the potential coup executor is exiled or successful, a pronunciamento is triggered. In this event, the government can then resist or be forced out. If you own Iberian Twilight or Voice of the People, you can also start a coup yourself, trying to oust the ruling dynasty for good. This is super cool, I mean, what can I say? So that means the free game actually gains content, but then Iberian Twilight and Voice of the People owners also gain additional capabilities. Vicky 3 really does it best when it comes to free and paid content, if you ask me. Now, there are also some significant changes for colonial administrations. This includes, for example, Australia, but also, of course, the colonial administrations that you can find in Africa throughout the game. The colonial administration principle allows colonial governments to be non-sovereign monarchies without the monarch directly controlling them. This means gone are all of the republics that live under Britain, and instead they are actual colonial administration with the king or queen at the head. They start with a subjecthood law as well in virtually all cases, as they are yet to become a nation. But they also feature the amendment of colonial racialization, which still gives significant acceptance bonuses to settlers and related colonial groups. With these changes, you will also be able to flip colonies that you steal from other countries to your culture. That means, if Portugal takes over the British Raj, it can become the Portuguese Raj, turning the primary culture of the country into Portuguese as well. Now, there is still more coming in the free patch, but from now on I am going to talk about changes made that are combining the free patch and the paid updates into one. Right now we're going to start with the periphery, so countries that are related to Spain and Portugal but are not Spain and Portugal, and features that come around for the DLC but aren't directly just locked for either Spain or Portugal. After that we're going to, well, you guessed it, go to Spain and Portugal. Now let's begin by talking about cultural commonwealths and colonial governors. Cultural commonwealths are a new powerful identity for power blocks. These ones are very similar to the religious one, but they focus obviously on culture. You gain cohesion based on how much the leader of the power block accepts the primary cultures of member states. This is really powerful and honestly very easy to maintain. Well, they just need to be your culture, and that doesn't really change. That is, unless you, as the leader, use the spread primary culture action to spread your culture to a much less prestigious block member. Now I can tell you they use the prestige kind of modifier right there because they are concerned of what happens when I, as Germany, grab Japan, add them to my power block, and indeed turn them German. I'm definitely gonna try it, but I'm curious how feasible it actually is. Now, on top of the changes to colonial administrations that I already mentioned, you can also, either as the overlord or as the colony yourself, request or assign a colonial governor. There you can choose a particular focus with powerful modifiers, yet again making it so that you can section your colonies into what you want them to be. Do they deliver goods to you? Do they suppress some type of hostile population? What exactly do they do? Well, you can now pick the right man for the job. Now let's move on from mechanics and to everything going on with the periphery of Spain and Portugal. So for example, Morocco, Cuba, the Philippines, and all of the former colonies in the Americas in general. We're going to start by talking about Morocco because it is of course an important nation, a country that is so close to Iberia and quite possibly wants to retake it in the name of Islam at some point in Victoria 3. If you haven't done that run, by the way, it's really fun, you definitely should. But here Morocco is in a difficult position. The Alawi dynasty is not new, but they are in a position where they only have very limited control over the territories of its country. This is now actually depicted in the Lands of Anarchy journal entry. This deals with establishing order so Morocco can actually surge to new heights. The journal entry requires developing regions to establish central control over the tribes of Morocco. Morocco, once they are a bit stronger, can also colonize a little during this process. Now this is already all the content for Morocco. There isn't really a lot more going on there, and I will say that I'm slightly disappointed. So then, what would it feel like to play Cuba? There is firstly a journal entry that wants you to build up an industry propped up by, you guessed it, your slaves. This journal entry does actually, however, also work if you abolish slavery before finishing it. On the political and diplomatic view, there is something really interesting happening here because you have various ways of either being extremely loyalist or seeking independence, but with different outcomes. First, let's talk about the loyalists. If you follow the historical route and attempt to turn Cuba into a regular Spanish province, you can join Spain and just become the country outright as a player, with Cuba as one of your core territories. This is interesting because it means that you as a player actually become Spain, but with the slave trade law. So yeah, there's clearly a lot going on there, and I really like that idea, which is odd, because normally becoming extremely loyalist is very, very boring. Now the opposite of this is seeking liberty. With this journal entry, you can initiate a higher level of liberty desire, and then ultimately either initiate a normal revolt or a slave revolt. This journal entry is incredible because it also allows you to follow other historical plans, such as being purchased by the United States of America. Cuba is really well designed when it comes to a country that is really tiny, really just 3 state regions and with very little ambition to blob any further. At least when it comes to history. And still, the actual content here is nice. Now from there, I think it makes sense if we move on to the Philippines. Other side of the world, of course, but not too dissimilar with Cuba. Now what really is interesting for the Philippines in particular is that their entire cultural makeup has been reworked. Only the Spanish are accepted at the start by the tag, so by the Philippines as a country. The content for this country fundamentally focuses on creating an identity for all of the Philippines together. This means that there will be conflicts between locals and the Spanish friars, but also the development of the Ilustrado, so the Filipino intellectuals that ultimately would give birth to a nation. The content is aimed at you ultimately forming a genuine nation and then either officially speaking a Hispanophone language or a Filipinic language. Now lastly here, let's go back to the Caribbean because obviously they had to make Haiti worse. The country is already paying reparations to France at game start, as you might know, but it is now also plagued by revolutionaries that want to free the Dominican Republic. Should the Dominicans rebel, they can then choose to side with the Spanish again, or sometimes even hand over territory to the United States as a treaty port, guaranteeing their independence. Giving you a lot of options here as a player so that you can become independent, and then indeed be in a position where you can't be attacked by Haiti again is really interesting. The different angles that you get here create yet another really nice addition to the Caribbean Sea. Now the last two parts that we are going to talk about here are of course Spain and Portugal. They are the centerpieces of this update and with that are getting most of the content. Let's just jump straight in by talking about Spain. Spain obviously is in a precarious position. Queen Isabel is merely a child under a regency, and in 1836 reactionary forces, the Carlists, have already declared their consent to current governance null and void, instead choosing rebellion in the northeast of the country. Inside of the country, however, there's also something going on. We have the governing coalition of the moderates. These are the landowners, military and clergy. This is a faction that supports wealth-based suffrage, Catholicism, free trade and the strong central state. They are favored by the Queen Regent and historically also favored by Isabel II herself. The landowners here also get a special ideology to fit the mold. Then in the opposition we have the Progressive Party. They support expanded suffrage, secularism and the reduction of military force power. Now outside of this we have the free content surrounding Carlist Spain and the Carlist War. Like I said, this is a reactionary force that has already said that the current societal contract does simply not apply to them. Their laws are different. They like autocracy and subjecthood. They do not want to make peace with a nation-state and any given constitution. The Carlist War is free content and starts as a guerrilla war, which means that they are not yet outright just completely at war, conquering one another. Battles here are smaller and spawn much less often than on regular fronts. There are also new battle conditions that limit death, and territories do not get occupied when a battle is won or lost. This can, however, escalate if either side uses a journal entry button that launches a full-scale war. The Carlists here, this is essentially how this game will start out for Spain, every single safe game, will gather power and then attempt a royal expedition to push against Spain in one strike, behead the snake and take it over in their name. Both of these sides are very interested in winning guerrilla battles because they give points that then enhances combat ability in the initial campaign waged once the war fully escalates into a full-scale war. I really do like this, but I want to stress one thing, and this is very similar to the Montenegro content that had been added with National Awakening. Montenegro can raid, and there is a mechanic there, but it isn't a general raiding mechanic. There is now a guerrilla warfare mechanic, and I can see many ways of expanding this into a general guerrilla warfare mechanic, but this isn't it. Just be aware of this, because if you're expecting guerrilla war and limited wars now to be a thing in Victoria 3, currently they are not. This means that we're going to see whether this is fun once we get to play the content right here. Now, let's talk about the paid Spain content though. The 2 Spain's journal entry unlocks after the first Carlist War ends. This journal entry tracks the dominance of conservatism and liberalism. Increasing tension makes coups easier and ties into the new coup mechanic. Remember, you can even trigger a coup yourself if you felt like it. Both sides here benefit from IG clout, military control and movements. This is also coupled with an economic regeneration journal entry. This is very similar to the Ottoman Tanzimat, where you want to achieve as many journal entries as you can. This also includes that you can achieve a partial success. Achieving all 6 might be too difficult for you, but what about 3? Maybe you can make that work. You can consciously reduce the effect of this journal entry success by simply saying we're only going to do some of it. Now, to stay inwards here in Spain, it is also important to mention that the Glorious Revolution of 1868 also plays a role. This is the revolution that ended Isabel II's rule and is a military one. This journal entry will open dynamically if a successful coup occurs while tension is high. You can then choose who to crown or whether you want to become a republic. We also have to, of course, talk about anarchism. It played a significant role in the political development of much of Europe, but also in Iberia. After the Glorious Revolution, anarchism first flared up in Spain. They organized, and the Federal Republicans ultimately waged the Cantonal Rebellion of 1874. All of this is added and can come to your Spain as well. Not to mention that with the DLC, there are a fair few events as well, such as the propaganda of the deed that radicalizes the anarchist movement worldwide. I think this has mostly been forgotten, but anarchists were incredibly wild in the 19th and early 20th century. Now from there, let's move on to what awaits Spain outside of its own borders. In the Spanish New World, you have two options, because in 1836, Spain did not yet recognize the independence of its former subjects. After you win the war against the Carlists, or as the Carlists, you have to decide, do you want to normalize your relations with them, or do you seek submission? You can now recognize independence in individual treaty articles, and will then get boosts to add these countries to your sphere if you are reapproaching. This means you can peacefully build a cultural convent that ultimately is subservient to you, although with some cooperation. Now, if you were to choose Reconquista, it would be different, because you will have to expect that the United States of America and of course Great Britain will get involved as well. Now finally, let's move on to Portugal, again starting with the free content. This obviously also mostly focuses on the internal politics, changing the setup to something that much more reflects the historical position Portugal was in. The country starts under conditions very similar to Spain. The long liberal wars ended 2 years prior to the start date, with liberal factions now challenging one another, very similar again to the moderates and the progressives in Spain. The Cartist party is in control and wants to modernize under the constitutional charter, while progressives want even further change. They also are adding two unique ideologies, that is Cartism and Miguelist. Cartism is all about moderate liberalism, whereas Miguelism are supporters of the old ways and absolute monarchy, founded upon Catholic values. The oligarchy law is enhanced with both the Electoral Clientelism Amendment and a Chamber of Gentlemen Deputies Amendment, representing the elected chamber of this government form. This is pretty much already it. Let's talk about the paid content. The regime after the liberal wars is called Devorismo, so the Devaros. This regime features rampant corruption and comes with massive legitimacy penalties, forced privatization and legitimacy debuffs going forward as well. This journal entry will end in a Cartist victory if the government either manages to pay back Portugal's debt or remains in power whilst privatizing a sufficient number of buildings. On the other hand, the constitutionalist side may triumph by either popular revolt or enacting a non-oligarchy voting law and electing a legitimate government with no Cartists. If the government falls to a liberal revolution, the progressive opposition may be instantly swept into power, a constitution enacted, and the head of the Cartists sent into exile. In parallel, the second liberalism journal entry exists as well, but it is intended to run a whole lot longer than the very quick decision between Cartists and constitutionalists. The journal entry has three possible outcomes, representing a victory for the constitutional monarchists, the republicans, and the Miguelists. To earn a victory as a constitutionalist, one must overcome Portugal's bureaucratic woes by establishing a bureaucracy surplus and completing the regeneration, retain a voting law, avoid coups or revolutions, and marginalize the Miguelists. One may also achieve the historical outcome, in which foreign policy failures, increasing mismanagement, and overreach by the Portuguese monarchy led to the fall of the monarchy as a whole, the establishment of a republic. Similar to Spain, Portugal also has a Tanzimat-like set of journal entries, the Fortunate Regeneration. This journal entry also comes with a special ideology for the petite bourgeoisie, Regenerator. The idea of this content is not exactly for you to freshen up and build an economy, but instead to revive and rebuild institutions, essentially to modernize your state. Furthermore, Portugal of course also has ambitions in Africa. Portugal can also claim the pink map, prompting Britain to respond and either granting the claims, or, what happened historically, saying no and potentially toppling the monarchy. Lastly, and for me personally, the most interesting part here is the issue of Brazil. The post-independence relations between Portugal and Brazil were comparatively much better than those between Spain and her former colonies. If Portugal declares an interest in Brazil and establishes positive relations, she will receive the Old Empire journal entry. This journal entry enables two unique interactions. The first is available if one owns Colossus of the South, so the Brazil DLC, and enables a strong Portugal to assist Brazil in preventing a coup against Emperor Pedro II, at the cost of Pedro's popularity. The second allows a Portugal that has caught up with Brazil to seek a restoration of the United Kingdom between the two countries. For Portugal to pursue the United Kingdom, she must first eclipse Brazil in both prestige and GDP. Once she has done so, one may choose to pursue reunification, and so activate the United Kingdom journal entry. Once this journal entry is active, Portugal will have access to a new treaty article, which requests Brazil amend her succession law to permit Portuguese candidates to succeed to a throne. Once the king or queen of Portugal becomes the heir of Brazil, one must wait for Pedro II to die or abdicate. As a republican coup is a serious threat to their ability to succeed to the throne, this journal entry will also keep Portugal informed as to the situation in Brazil. Looking at the Brazil content, I really like it. It works well together with Colossus of the South, but also if you don't have it, really accounting for both options right here. Not to mention that not just needing to outright conquer Brazil is just really neat. Honestly, I'm only missing the option of simply forcing Brazil to accept your king as their king or your queen as their queen. But you know what, now that war goals are moddable, I think that is actually pretty easy to do. Now, but let's say you don't care about Brazil and instead you care about Iberia. Pan-Iberist attitudes weren't too uncommon at the time. When the first Iberian country researches pan-nationalism, she will receive an event that allows her to pursue the ambition of unifying the peninsula. Every Iberian country that expresses broad interest in unification will become involved in the Iberian Union journal entry. Essentially, kind of a situation from EU5, right? You may press the Establish Real Union button once all Iberian countries have sufficiently synchronized their laws and possess good relations with one another. It makes sense that, of course, a monarchy isn't exactly going to merge with, let's say, an anarchist country. The button which allows for diplomatic unification has different variants depending on one's governance principles, with two theocracies instead signing a concordat, or two anarchist territories coming to consider themselves as shared units within a confederation. In addition to the prior button, the communist and anarchist iterations of this journal entry permit for the creation of a new culture for the Federation to be. If the date is after 1890, one is playing as a council republic and one is either cultural exclusion or multiculturalism, one may recognize the Esperanto language as an official language of the Federation. Upon forming Iberia, a certain portion of one's pops will adopt the Iberian culture. The Iberian culture has the Iberian heritage trait and the Esperanto language trait, with Esperanto being placed within the Romance language trait group. As a finishing touch, if one chooses to make the Iberian culture the exclusive primary culture of the Federation, all of the states and cities in Iberia will adopt Esperanto names. I gotta be honest with you, that's amazing. I really like what they have done with Iberia. Frankly, the content that we're getting here is great. For me personally, I need to see whether the AI can do it properly, but if it can, you will be seeing so much really funky alt history. I think it is the right way to go. The free content is a lot more numerous than what I was personally expecting, and what I haven't even talked about at all and don't really want to talk about, instead simply look at the screen right now, is of course the magnificent art. As always, we should give $50 billion to the artists of Victoria 3 because they are doing incredible work. I will personally say that I am very happy with what I'm seeing for something that is just an immersion pack. As far as I understood it, I thought that there wouldn't really be new mechanics, and now we are looking at coups being reworked, law amendments making it in, manipulating elections, and so on and so forth. The resources that they do have clearly are being used very well. The impact that this DLC and update should have on all of your games, not just the ones you play in Iberia, sounds really nice. I look forward to this coming out and hope that you are now well informed. Let me know what you think in the comments, but I will leave you right here. See you later. Alligator.